Every morning at exactly 6:45, Ethan Holloway set a fresh cup of coffee on the counter in front of the same woman. Faded gray coat, tangled hair, shoes worn through at the left heel. She never ordered. She never paid. She simply sat at the end stool and waited, and Ethan never made her feel like that was something she needed to apologize for. For 11 weeks, nobody asked questions. Then one Tuesday morning in February, 4 men in tailored suits walked through the front door, scanned the room once, and looked directly at her, and the woman who had spent 11 weeks looking lost slowly sat up straight. The first morning she appeared, Ethan thought she had wandered in by accident. It happened sometimes someone pushed through the wrong door, looked around, realized the morning plate was not what they were looking for, and left without a word. He had been behind the counter since 5:30, as he always was, running through the opening routine he had done so many times it no longer required thought. Wipe the grill, check the coffee machine, restock the napkin holders, unlock the front door at 6 sharp, and wait for the neighborhood to decide it was ready to move. She came in at 6:43 that first morning, 2 minutes before Sophie arrived from the apartment upstairs with her backpack already on. The woman did not look at the menu board. She did not glance around to find a table. She walked directly to the end stool, the one farthest from the door, and sat down with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who had thought about where they were going before they walked through the door. Her coat was gray and had seen too many winters. Her hair was loose and tangled at the edges. Her shoes were worn completely through at the left heel. Ethan set a cup of coffee in front of her without asking. Strong, no sugar, because that was what he had already poured, and it seemed more important to put something warm in front of her than to ask how she took it. She looked at the cup for a long moment, then she wrapped both hands around it and did not speak. He did not ask her to pay. He told himself it was because the morning rush was starting and he did not have time. He almost believed it. The next morning she was back. Same stool, same time. Ethan poured a second cup with 2 sugars because he had noticed the morning before that she had reached for the sugar dispenser and then pulled her hand back as though she had decided she did not have the right to ask for small things. He set the cup down without a word. She wrapped both hands around it the same way she had the day before. By the third morning, it was simply what happened. No explanation, no arrangement, no agreement spoken between them. She arrived at 6:43. He set the coffee down at 6:45. The regulars began to notice by the end of the first week a murmur between 2 men at the corner table, a pointed glance from a woman who came in every Tuesday for eggs and wheat toast. Ethan pretended not to hear any of it, because there was nothing useful to say to people who had already decided what they were looking at. Sophie, who was 7 years old and had her father's dark eyes and a habit of noticing everything adults had learned to look past, sat at the counter each morning with her bowl of oatmeal and watched the woman at the end stool with the open, unapologetic curiosity of a child who had not yet learned to pretend she was not watching. One morning in the 3rd week, without any warning, Sophie slid the sugar dispenser down the counter toward the woman. Not a word, just the quiet, practical gesture of a child who had seen someone hesitate and decided to make hesitating unnecessary. The woman looked at the sugar dispenser. Then she looked at Sophie. She gave a single, small nod, the kind that means more than most sentences. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Ethan stood at the kitchen sink thinking about that nod. He thought about the way Sophie had done it. No ceremony, no expectation of gratitude, just the simple act of closing a distance. He dried his hands and walked to the doorway of Sophie's room. She was already half asleep, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress. He said her name softly. She opened her eyes. He told her that her mother used to sit at the end of the counter the same way, on the hard days, the days when something was too heavy to carry in the middle of a room full of people and needed to be set down somewhere quiet. He said that sometimes people needed a place to sit without being asked to explain themselves. Sophie asked whether he knew what the woman was thinking about. He said he did not. She asked how he knew she needed to be there, then. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said he just knew. Sophie closed her eyes. Ethan stood in the doorway a little longer, listening to her breathe, before he went back to the kitchen and turned off the light. The weeks moved forward with the particular steadiness of a routine that has found its shape. November became December. The temperature outside the morning plate dropped, and the city went gray and close. The woman's coat was not warm enough for the weather, but she never shivered, or if she did it quietly enough that no one noticed. Ethan started keeping the thermostat 2 degrees higher in the mornings. He told himself it was because the coffee machine ran cold in the winter. She began to stay longer. In the early weeks, she was gone before the 7 o'clock rush arrived, slipping off the stool and out the door with the same quiet efficiency with which she had come. But somewhere around the 5th week, she began to linger. The rush would come and go, the counter would fill and empty, and when the noise settled back down around 8:30, she was still there, both hands resting around a cup long since gone cold, holding it the way people hold things for the warmth rather than the drink. Ethan did not hurry her. He wiped the counter, checked the remaining tables, refilled the napkin holders a second time. The diner had its own rhythm in the late morning, slower, quieter, the particular stillness of a place that had already done its main work for the day. And in that stillness, she began to talk. Not in any organized way. It came in pieces, the way things come when a person has been holding them too long and has finally found a place where the holding is not required. She mentioned a brother, without using his name. She mentioned a decision she had made that she could not unmake. She said, once, that she had spent years building something and then watched someone else decide what it meant, and that the watching had been worse than the losing. Ethan listened. He did not ask her to clarify or continue. He wiped the counter and poured coffee and let the silence between her sentences be what it was, not an absence, but a space where she could put the next thing when she was ready. One morning in the 7th week, Sophie dropped her gloves, getting off the stool, and crouched to pick them up. When she stood, she was holding something else, a small black card she had found on the floor near the end of the counter. She looked at it for a moment with the focused attention she gave to things she could not immediately categorize. Then she carried it to her father. Ethan took the card. It was a key card, the kind used for electronic access in large office buildings. On the front was a logo, 3 letters in clean type, WCG. Below it, in smaller text, Executive Access Level 5. He held it for 1 second. Then he walked to the end of the counter and set it down in front of the woman without a word. She looked at it the way you look at something you had hoped no one would find. Her hand moved to cover it and pull it from the counter in a single motion, fast and practiced, as though she had already calculated how quickly it could be done before she moved. She slipped it into her coat pocket. Her eyes came up to meet his. For one instant, just one, the careful blankness she wore like the gray coat was not there. What was there instead was something much more alert and much more specific, the look of a person who had just realized that the place they believed was safe might not be as invisible as they had thought. Ethan looked back at her for a moment, then he turned and went back to the grill. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. But something had shifted between them, quiet as the temperature in a room when someone opens a window, and they both knew it. The Tuesday morning that changed everything arrived without announcing itself. The sky over Morrison Street was the flat white of a February morning that has not yet decided whether it intends to snow. The early regulars were already settled, the 2 men from the construction company at the corner table, the woman with the wheat toast order in her usual booth, a retired schoolteacher named Gerald, who read the newspaper every morning from front to back and never spoke unless spoken to. The woman in the gray coat was on her end stool at 6:43. Ethan had set the coffee down at 6:45. Everything was exactly as it had been for 11 weeks. At 7:12, 2 black SUVs pulled to the curb outside. Ethan saw them through the front window. Dark paint, tinted glass, the particular blankness of vehicles designed to communicate authority without saying anything out loud. 4 men stepped out, dressed in dark suits that fit well enough to be expensive, and moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who were not confused about what they were there to do. 2 wore earpieces. All 4 of them scanned the street before moving toward the door. The bell above the entrance rang once. They came in and stopped just inside the doorway. The nearest man looked across the room in a single sweep, the kind that takes in everything at once and registers only what it came for. His gaze traveled the length of the counter and stopped at the end stool. The diner went quiet. Not all at once, in stages, the way a room goes quiet when the temperature of the air changes and everyone feels it before they understand why. The woman in the gray coat did not stand up. She did not turn around. Her hands tightened on the coffee cup by a fraction enough that Ethan noticed it from behind the counter, and then she was very still. The nearest man walked toward her. He stopped 2 feet away and said, without raising his voice, that the board required her presence. He used her last name, Weston. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Gerald looked up from his newspaper. The 2 men from the construction company looked at each other. The woman with the wheat toast put down her fork. Ethan did not move. He stood behind the counter with both hands flat on the surface and kept his eyes on the man who had spoken. Claire, and it was the first time Ethan had known her name, the first time the woman on the end stool had a name that attached her to a world beyond this counter, turned her head slowly and looked at Ethan. Not a plea. Not a question. Something quieter than either of those things. The look of a person who, before they have to leave somewhere they did not realize they needed, takes a moment to remember where they are. Ethan said it quietly, just for her, that she did not have to go if she did not want to. The man in the suit turned toward him. He said, with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to managing inconvenient people, that this matter did not concern Ethan. Ethan looked at him directly. He said it was his diner. He said she was his customer. There was a pause, the kind that is not uncertainty, but the moment before a decision is made. Claire spoke. She said she needed 5 minutes. The men looked at each other. The one who had spoken checked his watch and said 5 minutes. Then, all 4 of them went back through the door and stood on the sidewalk where they could see in through the window. The regulars went back to their breakfasts with the careful casualness of people pretending they had not just witnessed something they very much intended to think about later. Ethan poured a fresh cup of coffee and set it in front of Claire. She had gotten up from the stool and was standing, and she looked at the cup for a moment before she sat back down, not because she needed more coffee, because she needed one more moment of this being what it was before it became something else. She asked if he had ever heard of Weston Capital. He said the name was familiar, the way names of large things are familiar, not known exactly, but encountered before, in the way you encounter the names of things that simply exist beyond the edges of your own world. She told him what it was. A capital investment group built on commercial real estate and urban development portfolios across 7 states. Her brother James had co-founded it with her 18 years ago, when they were operating out of a 2-room office on the 4th floor of a building that no longer existed. James had died in September. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that particular disease tends to be. He had been 53 years old and had never once acted like a man who expected to run out of time. After James died, their CFO, a man named Marcus Webb, who had been with the company for 11 years and whom Claire herself had recruited and trusted, began a careful, methodical campaign to use the board's concern about her emotional state as leverage to push through a temporary transfer of executive authority. Temporary, he said, because she needed space to grieve. Compassionate, he called it, in the particular way that people call something compassionate when they mean convenient for themselves. He had begun scheduling board calls she was not informed about. He had rerouted approval chains through his own office. He had started the slow work of making himself necessary by making her look fragile, and the board, uncertain and grieving in its own way, had not yet decided whether to believe him. She had not signed anything. She had refused every document placed in front of her, read every clause, and said no each time with the particular calmness of someone who understood exactly what was being attempted. And so she had left, not because she had given up, but because staying meant being present while people worked to take everything James had spent his life building, and she could not watch that and remain capable of fighting it at the same time. She had walked out one October morning, left her car in the parking structure beneath the building, and started moving. She had ended up here, on this stool, because the door was open and it was cold outside, and there was a man behind the counter who put coffee in front of her without asking her to account for herself. Ethan listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the counter between them. He asked whether she had any evidence. She said she did. Emails between Marcus and 2 board members that predated James's death by 4 months, which meant the plan had been forming while James was still alive, and Marcus was still attending their weekly leadership meetings and shaking his hand. Recordings of board calls she had not been invited to, and a contract bearing James's signature, dated 3 weeks after James died, which meant either someone had forged it, or Marcus Webb had found a way to do something that Claire intended, to make certain he spent a very long time explaining to a judge. She said all of it was on a hard drive inside the safe in her office. Ethan asked which building. She looked at him. And then, she said at 14 Morrison Street. He nodded slowly. He told her he was the plumbing contractor for that building. Monthly maintenance. He had a key to the service entrance and a face that no one at 14 Morrison had ever looked at closely enough to remember in any detail. Outside, through the glass, one of the men in suits checked his watch again. She said she did not want to put him in the middle of something that was not his problem. He thought about Sophie in a classroom somewhere across the neighborhood, tilting her head at something she was trying to figure out. He thought about the cup of coffee he had poured 11 weeks ago because a woman was sitting in the cold and it seemed like the right thing to do. He could not find the precise moment when doing the right thing had become contingent on whether it was convenient, and so he decided that moment had not arrived yet. He asked her to tell him exactly where the safe was. Marcus Webb had spent 11 years inside 14 Morrison Street. He knew the names of every board member, every senior attorney, every executive assistant on the upper floors. He had walked through the front lobby hundreds of times. What he did not know, what men like Marcus Webb rarely bothered to learn, was the name of a single person who had ever fixed the plumbing in that building. He did not know the secondary drainage corridor on the east side of the basement, rerouted 2 years prior when the original line corroded beyond repair. He did not know which camera mounted in the freight elevator hallway had a 15-degree blind spot to the left of the main corridor junction. He did not know that the office door on the 14th floor had a misaligned latch that maintenance had logged 3 times without it ever being fully repaired. Ethan knew all of these things, not because he had gathered them deliberately, but because he had spent 3 years keeping that building functional from the inside out quietly, without acknowledgement, the way the work of holding things together tends to happen. That was the thing about service entrances. You could walk through one carrying a toolbox and be completely invisible to people who had long ago decided that the world was divided into those who needed to be seen and those who were there to keep the lights on. The plan came together in the quiet of the diner after the men outside had been told they would need to wait longer. Claire described the 14th floor layout from memory, the position of her office, the credenza along the south wall, the combination to the safe behind it, the appearance and labeling of the external hard drive inside. She explained what she had arranged with Detective Ray Okafor of the Portland Police Bureau, a man she had known for years, since before Weston Capital was large enough to have people who wanted to take it from her. She had been running a continuous encrypted backup of the drive's contents to a cloud account. The moment the drive was accessed, the full archive would transmit automatically to Okafor. He had been waiting, she said. All he needed was the evidence sitting in that safe, while Marcus Webb spent 6 weeks rearranging the company around it. He arrived the next morning at 7:15. His truck, his uniform, his toolbox identical to every other maintenance visit. The woman at the building management desk found his name in the system and waved him through without a second look. He took the freight elevator to the basement, walked the familiar route past the mechanical room, and came up through the utility corridor on the east side of the building. The 14th floor was quiet. Most of the executive staff had not yet arrived, and the few who were already at their desks had the focused, inward quality of people absorbed in their own mornings. No one looked up at the man in the gray work shirt moving down the hallway with a toolbox in one hand. He found Claire's office. The door was unlocked, she had told him it would be, that Marcus had not bothered to change that detail because it had never occurred to him that the threat would arrive from that direction. The safe was behind the credenza along the south wall, exactly where she had described. The combination worked on the first attempt. The hard drive was smaller than he had expected. He put it in his breast pocket, closed the safe, and returned the credenza to its original position. He had been in the office for 4 minutes. He was descending in the freight elevator when the trouble started. He heard it before he saw it, voices in the basement corridor below, 2 of them, speaking with the clipped urgency of men who had been given specific instructions and were now carrying them out. He stepped out of the elevator into the mechanical room and stood still long enough to understand the situation. 2 men, stationed at the exit that led to the parking structure. Their suits were wrong for building security, too expensive, too deliberate. Marcus had someone monitoring the camera feeds. He had suspected contact, or simply taken precautions on the principle that precautions cost less than being wrong. Either way, they had flagged the footage faster than Ethan had allowed for. He stood in the mechanical room for 30 seconds. Then, he went left through the secondary utility corridor, the one he had rerouted 2 years ago when the original drainage line corroded beyond repair. He came out through a maintenance hatch into the loading bay on the north side of the building, crossed the alley in the February cold, and came around to where his truck was parked. He was at the driver's door when a hand came down on his shoulder. He stopped. He did not run. Running was what people did when they had done something wrong, and he had concluded in the mechanical room that he had not done anything wrong. He turned around slowly. The man behind him was not one of the 4 from the diner. He was larger and older, with the particular stillness of someone paid to be very patient and occasionally very much the opposite. He asked, in a flat voice, what Ethan had been doing in the building. Ethan said he was the plumbing contractor. He gave his full name, his company name, and the name of the building management contact who could confirm his maintenance agreement. He said that if the man wanted to verify any of it, he was welcome to call the facilities department directly, and Ethan would wait right where he was. The man's hand remained on his shoulder. He looked at Ethan for a long time, the specific, measuring look of someone deciding whether what they are looking at is worth the effort of pursuing. Ethan looked back and kept his face exactly as calm as it would be if there were nothing in his breast pocket except his own heartbeat. His phone buzzed once in his back pocket. The prepaid number. Claire, confirming that the files were transmitting, that the evidence was already traveling somewhere Marcus Webb could not intercept or delete. The man's hand came off his shoulder. He said, without particular expression, that Ethan should clear out. Ethan got in his truck. He drove 2 blocks north, pulled to the curb, and sat with both hands on the wheel for a moment, breathing steadily. Then he sent 3 words to the prepaid number. It went through. 37 minutes later, Claire Weston walked through the front entrance of 14 Morrison Street for the first time in 6 weeks. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back, and she moved through the lobby with the quality of someone who has been many things lost. Exhausted, afraid, and has decided, on this specific morning, to be none of them. 2 members of her personal security detail flanked her. They were people she had employed directly for more than a decade, people whose loyalty had never belonged to the board and never would be offered there. Marcus Webb was in his 16th floor office when the call came from the board's chair. A full board meeting had been convened for 9 o'clock. Detective Ray Okafor of the Portland Police Bureau would be in attendance, along with a representative from the district attorney's office and an independent forensic accountant who had been reviewing the documents delivered to him for the past 72 hours. Marcus Webb was informed that his presence was required. He was not given the option to prepare. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Ethan sat in the lobby of 14 Morrison Street for most of it. He had not intended to stay. He had driven away after the parking structure, gone back to the morning plate, opened the diner for the late morning regulars. But at 8:15 he had found himself pulling back onto Morrison Street without entirely deciding to. He told himself it was because he had parked nearby and needed to move the truck. He parked it in the same spot and went inside and sat down in one of the lobby chairs and waited, watching the elevator bank without watching anything in particular. At 11:40, the far left elevator opened. Claire came out ahead of her security team and crossed the lobby. She was not walking the way she had walked in with that forward, deliberate quality, but the way people walk when something they have carried for a very long time has finally been set down, and the body has not yet finished adjusting to the difference. She stopped when she saw him sitting there. He stood up. She said, after a moment, that it was done. Marcus Webb had been taken into custody pending formal charges. The board had voted unanimously to restore her executive authority, effective immediately. Ethan nodded. She looked at him for a long time. She said she did not know how to thank him for what he had done. He said there was nothing to thank him for. She said that was not true. He thought about it and decided she was right and said nothing. Outside on Morrison Street, the February sky had finally made its decision. It had begun to snow lightly, the first real snow of the year, settling on parking meters and bare tree branches without accumulating into anything serious, just enough to make everything look briefly like a different version of itself. The morning papers carried the story on the third page of the business section. Claire declined every interview request. The diner regulars who had been present that Tuesday morning did not say much about what they had seen, which was its own kind of tribute to the particular loyalty that develops between people who share the same counter for years. Ethan opened the morning plate the next morning at 6 as he always did. He went through the routine grill, coffee machine, napkin holders. He unlocked the front door at 6 sharp, then, without consciously deciding to, he poured a cup of coffee with 2 sugars and set it at the end of the counter. He stood there for a moment looking at it. The stool was empty for the first time in 11 weeks. He had known it would be, and he had still poured the coffee, and he was still standing there looking at it, which told him something he decided to hold on to rather than examine too closely. The morning regulars filed in. Gerald with his newspaper, the construction men with their corner table, the woman with the wheat toast order, the diner filled with its ordinary sounds, chairs scraping, the coffee machine completing its grinding complaint, someone asking for the ketchup, everything exactly as it had been. At 8:14, the bell above the door rang. She was not wearing the gray coat. She had on a dark wool jacket that fit the way well-made things fit, and her hair was down but brushed, and her shoes were not worn through at the heel. She looked like herself, which was a phrase that meant something very specific here, something having to do with the version of herself that had existed before the version that sat on the end stool and needed coffee she could not pay for. She looked around the diner once. Then she walked to the counter and sat down in the last stool on the end. Ethan did not say anything. He reached for a cup, filled it, and set it in front of her. She looked at the coffee. She looked up at him. She said she did not know how to do this part, the thanking, that she was better at most other things. He said she had just done it. She looked at the coffee again, both hands wrapped around the cup, and for the first time since he had known her, the expression on her face was not the expression of someone managing the weight of something alone. It was something easier, something that had not decided yet what it wanted to become, which was, in its own quiet way, a beginning. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm different from the 11 weeks before them, but not entirely discontinuous. Claire came to the morning plate each morning, though later, now 8 or 8:30, after the rush rather than before it. She did not sit in the same careful silence. She talked about the work of reassembling what Marcus had spent weeks quietly taking apart, about small things and ordinary things, the particular texture of days that were no longer defined entirely by what was being lost. Ethan talked more than he usually did. He told her about the morning plate, the loan he had taken out 8 years ago, the summer the grill stopped working for 6 consecutive days during the hottest week of the year, and he had kept the place open on cold sandwiches and something that was either stubbornness or stupidity, and he had never fully decided which. He told her about Sophie's science fair project, the water treatment facility model she had been building, with the intensity of someone who had decided a thing mattered and intended to prove it to anyone willing to stand still, long enough to listen. He told her about Dana. Not all of it, some things are not for counters, but enough. He said she had been the kind of person who made everywhere she went feel inhabited. He said the diner had taken 3 years to feel that way again after she was gone, and that it had been Sophie who did it without knowing she was doing it, just by being small and curious and completely indifferent to the possibility that the world might not cooperate with her plans for it. Claire listened, the way she listened to everything, fully present, unhurried, not filling the silences with the things people fill silences with when they are not truly listening. One morning, in early March, she mentioned the STEM scholarship program at Sophie's school, a grant-funded initiative that had been running for years and was now underfunded to the point of near collapse. The gap was not large, she said, not by any measure she worked with. She said she wanted to fund it, not as a gesture, because it was a good program and it deserved to continue existing. He said that was a separate matter from what she seemed to be building toward. She said he was right, and asked it anyway whether he would consider letting her offset some of his operating costs. The billing rate he had maintained at 14 Morrison for 3 years of monthly maintenance was roughly 40% below what the work actually warranted. He said he had enough. She said she knew, and that was precisely why she was asking. He said he would think about it. She said that was fair. Later that week, Ethan agreed to let her cover the science fair exhibition fees. He told himself it was because Sophie had worked hard and it was the practical thing to do. He also knew it was something else that it had become easier, gradually, to let things in. Some things become easier not because you work at them, but because someone has been putting coffee in front of you every morning without asking you to explain yourself, and eventually the not explaining becomes the not needing to, which is a different thing entirely. On a Saturday in mid-March, the 3 of them went to the science exhibition at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. Ethan and Sophie and Claire, moving through the exhibits in the companionable way of people who are not entirely certain what to call what they are to each other but have decided, without discussing it, that whatever it is worth keeping. Sophie explained her water treatment model to 2 museum volunteers and 1 9-year-old who had wandered over from the rocketry exhibit by accident, and all 3 of them listened the way people listen when someone is speaking with genuine conviction about something they believe matters. Walking out afterward, Sophie reached up and took Claire's hand without asking or explaining, the way children do when they have made a decision and see no reason to discuss it. Claire looked down at their joined hands, then looked up and caught Ethan's eye. Neither of them said anything, but they were both still walking, and Sophie was already several paces ahead, pulling them forward the way children do toward whatever came next. 6 months moved through Morrison Street with the ease of time that has stopped being measured. The morning plate kept its hours. The coffee machine kept making its grinding complaint before 6 every morning and kept failing to actually break down. The faded sign above the door went another summer without being repainted, which had by then become a feature rather than a flaw, something that told you exactly how long this place had been here and exactly how little it intended to change. Sophie placed 3rd at the science fair in April and accepted the result with the composure of someone who had done the work she believed in and did not require an external confirmation to know it. Claire spent the spring and into summer rebuilding what Marcus had spent 6 weeks quietly dismantling. His trial was scheduled for October. 3 new board members had been seated. No one at Weston Capital raised questions about her fitness to lead. Claire did not expect them to. James's estate had included a sum set aside for a cause he had spoken about for years, without ever formalizing a fund to support mental health access for people working in high-pressure industries, where the expectation was constant performance, and the permission to stop performing was withdrawn at precisely the moment it was most needed. Claire finalized the fund in June and named it after her brother. That was the only decision in the entire process that required no deliberation at all. On an evening in late August, Sophie asked her father a question while they were doing the dishes together. She was drying a bowl, turning it slowly in her hands with the absent, wandering focus she brought to tasks that left her mind free to work on other things, and she asked whether it was possible to begin a friendship with something as small as a cup of coffee. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He thought about the first morning, the gray coat, the end stool, the cup he had set down in front of a stranger because it was cold and the coffee was already made and there was no sufficient reason not to. He thought about a keycard on the floor, and 4 men in a doorway, and a freight elevator at 7:15 in the morning, and an alley in the February cold, with a hand on his shoulder, and 3 words sent from a truck parked 2 blocks north. He thought about a Saturday afternoon at a science museum, and a child pulling 2 people forward by 1 hand each, towards something that was still in the process of being decided. He told Sophie he thought it was possible. He said people could begin with almost anything, if they were the right people and the moment was the right one. He said that sometimes the smallest things turned out to be the ones that mattered most, because they were the ones that happened without calculation, not because someone decided to be generous or careful or kind, but simply because it was early in the morning and someone was cold and the coffee was already there. Sophie considered this with a slight tilt of her head that meant she was thinking something through carefully. She put the bowl in the cabinet. She said she thought that made sense. Outside, Morrison Street was doing what it did at the end of summer, the last warm light of the year, falling at a low angle across the faded paint of the morning plate sign, across the pavement, across the empty end stool visible through the glass. Not empty the way it used to be empty, which was the particular absence of something that had once been there and was gone. Just a stool, in a diner, at the end of a counter, waiting for 6:45, which was enough, which had always been enough.